So here's without and with. So if you have live drums, actual recorded drums, you know how challenging it can be, especially on like a snare drum mic that might have a lot of cymbal bleed from your hi-hats or kick drum bleed from below. And this trick I'm about to show you works just like a noise gate, but it does it in a much better way. So I'm gonna show you exactly how to dial that in and then clean up your snare track so that it's actually usable in your mixes. Something else that you need to be really good at if you want a usable snare is to know how to dial in the right amount of compression for stuff. So if you need a little help with compression, I have a free downloadable guide in the description. It's my Compression 101 ebook. It goes over all the different details of what compression is and how to dial it in to make sure that you're getting the punchiest snare drums possible. Go and grab that. That's my free gift to you. All right, so check this out. I rediscovered this on a track that I dug up out of my archives that's like 10 years old at this point. All right, so let me show you what it actually sounds like without this on. There's so much bleed from that kick drum and all the cymbals in this top mic, it's almost unusable. Bobby from 10 years ago came up with a really cool solution, which I forgot about, and that is to use something like a multi-band gate or a multi-band exciter in this case. And so this is something called Pro MB. It's by FabFilter. And most people use this as like just a compressor. It's made for multi-band compression. But right here, there's different modes. There's compress and there's expand. So if you put this in expand mode, you're basically making this thing work in the opposite way that a normal compressor does. And so there might be other plugins. I can't think of anywhere off the top of my head because this is the one I always use. But if you set this up for expand mode, okay, so I have it set to like minus 14 dB. So with no signal present, it stays quiet, okay? Once the snare drum hits and it goes above that threshold, this expands and goes back to 0 dB volume, okay? So it's just gonna go back to what the level of the sound is initially, and so that's gonna be our snare drum hit. And then as soon as the snare drum hit drops back below, it's gonna sink back down to minus 15. So when the snare drum is not there, it's like quieting down the kick drums, it's quieting down the cymbals, and then when the snare drum's present, it jumps up to regular volume, and then you can control that release back down to the quieter part by adjusting the release parameter here. If you want it to drop down slower, that's going to let more bleed in, but if you make it fast, you can clean up the track dramatically. Let me show you what this sounds like with and without this. So here's without and with. Pretty crazy, right? So it works extremely well as a drum gate. And something that I want to point out is I have this set as a crossover at about 1,000 hertz. So you can really fine tune exactly what's going on in each one of these bands depending on what is bleeding through the mic. So if, let's say you have tom bleed or something and it's all around 500 hertz, so you can have this set up with different attack and release parameters to really focus in on cleaning up all that bleed. It's amazing. One last thing I want to point out that's really, really helpful is if you have a way to adjust the listening frequency of the expansion. And what I mean by that is using Pro MB, we have the ability of having it listen within the band. So it's listening for the snare drum hit or a sound to exceed a threshold within this specific band. Or we can go to free mode, where basically now it's only listening in this frequency range for sounds to exceed the threshold. This is important because if you have a kick drum, most of those frequencies are kind of subby or sub-frequencies of everything. So you really want to have it not focus on that because you might get false positives, right? Because those sounds might be almost as loud as a snare drum in some cases. So by shifting it outside of where the kick drum normally lives and where there's not a lot of energy for that kick drum, we have the ability to really fine tune a way of removing all that kick drum bleed. And you can also do the same thing with this high frequency band, right? This is cymbal bleed. So if we go into free mode and we shift it outside of these high frequencies down into the lower frequencies here, or make it focused around where most of the snare energy is, we can have it ignore a lot of the cymbal bleed. You're making it so that it works really, really effectively at getting rid of those high frequency cymbals as well. And then again, you can independently control the attack and release parameters here so that you're not getting any weird washy kind of sounds, and it sounds very natural. So I find that you have to have the attack set as fast as possible because we want to catch when the snare drum hits and immediately jump up to 0. Otherwise, you're going to hurt your transient. And then you can fine tune the release, but I find that a fast release usually works the best in this case for minimizing as much bleed as possible. Okay. So that's the trick. Use a multi-band expander, or if you have a multi-band compressor that can work in expansion mode, try this and then focus your sidechain to listen to the frequencies that are dominated by the snare drum and minimize it where the bleed is coming from. So try to keep it out of the high frequencies or the sub stuff from the kick drum. And you're going to have a really effective snare drum gate. And you can do the same approach for kick drums. Just focus on the threshold being the sub frequencies from the kick, and then ignoring all the high frequencies from cymbals or maybe the snare drum. So a pretty cool trick if you're stuck with tracks that have way too much bleed in them, but I wanted to share this because this is a really powerful strategy for cleaning up your drum tracks without having to go in and manually edit everything. And the other benefit is allows you to dial in the amount of bleed you want so that you can maintain the original sound of the recording in your final production. That gives the song a little bit of a unique fingerprint, so it's not getting lost in the sea of over-processed music that's coming out nowadays. So let me know if you found this helpful. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have. Let me know if you use a similar strategy as well, or if there's some drum gating plugin that is next level that does an even better job than this. Let me know in the comments too. Don't forget, I have that downloadable guide on Compression 101. So the next step of this process is to make your drum sound punchy, and that guide's going to help you dial in the exact right compression settings to make it sound pro. My name is Bobby Balo. I'm the mixing and mastering engineer at Raytown Productions. I'll see you in the next video.